you're watching the Arise interview. Of course, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? With me, Charles Aniagolu. Now, just over 72 hours after a man was shot dead by British police on London Bridge after stabbing to death 2 people, a vigil has been taking place in London and Cambridge to pay tribute to the victims of that terror attack and to honour those who responded to the incident. 2 former University of Cambridge students, 23-year-old Saskia Jones and Jack Merritt, who's 25, were stabbed to death at a prisoner rehabilitation conference by the convicted terrorist Usman Khan before Khan was shot dead by police. At the remembrance service in Guildhall Yard in the City of London, not far from the scene of the attack, hundreds attended the vigil, including the families of the victims, as well as the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, the main opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who had this to say.
The best way to defeat this hatred is not by turning on one another, but it's by focusing on the values that bind us, to take hope from the heroism of ordinary Londoners and our emergency services who ran towards danger, risking their lives to help people they didn't even know. And it's also by drawing inspiration from the lives of Jack and Saskia, who from an early age chose to dedicate themselves to helping others. So yes, we come together this morning in condolences, but also in a spirit of defiance, to say that London will never be cowed or intimidated by terrorism, and also to commit to honouring the memory of Saskia and Jack by dedicating our future to one not defined by hatred, but one defined by hope, by unity, and by love.
And that's the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan there. Well, for more on the security questions that have been raised by that terror incident in London, I'm joined now from our studios in West London by the international security analyst, David Otto. Thank you very much indeed for coming in, David. I know this has been a busy period with this attack on Friday for you, so we really appreciate your taking the time to come in and talk to us. And the fact that this man, Usman Khan, was not only known but was a convicted terrorist, that is a huge point, isn't it?
Charles, you're very correct, and this is a huge damage, to the political establishment, because Usman Khan was known not just because he had been convicted of a terror-related incident, but because he was actually released just recently in December 2018, and he had been on tag. He actually committed this horrendous crime while on a rehabilitation program, and this is devastating. It's left all sorts of questions as to what happens within these deradicalization and rehabilitation programs, but more so what is being done when prisoners of this nature are sentenced. I mean, the argument has been, as some have put it, that he shouldn't have been let out in the first place. But from a security angle, that doesn't really help, because it doesn't matter how long you put somebody in jail. I think the essential thing is what kind of programs that are carried out in jail that would make these individuals to turn, into people that can live in society. So I think the issue here is not so much of the attack itself, but so much about what the UK really does when it says that it carries out disengagement and deradicalization programs in jail. So it comes at a very critical period, Charles, when the elections, are actually going on, the campaign for elections are actually going on. So politicians are head scratching each other, playing a ping pong and accusing each other of, being the principal fault, in terms of this event. But again, it comes down to the point of, what really happens, when somebody is convicted, what kind of programs are given them while in prison, and what kinds of follow-up programs are given to these individuals when they are being rehabilitated back into society. That is the biggest question which the government really needs to answer now.
Absolutely. And as you said there, David, this latest incident has clearly shown that releasing unreformed jihadis back into society and thinking that a tag around their ankles is going to keep people safe is a joke. But meanwhile, the investigation, as I understand it, still ongoing, but the police are convinced, are they, at this stage, that Usman Khan was acting alone?
That is the initial investigation. As you know, it's too early to conclude as to whether he had or he has any accomplices. Terrorist individuals, may or may not have networks. Usually they do. But whether they leave any traces as to who they have been talking to or who has helped them in planning these kind of activities, it's another matter. The big question is, for somebody like himself that was obviously a dangerous individual, why was he not monitored? Usually when people are released on a license and on tag, there is a strict monitoring regime, especially for somebody who has a terror-related background. So I think the biggest question is, how does the government really make sure that prisons have the required capacity? Because there is a lot of talk about prison de-radicalization, but nothing really goes on in the background. People are just locked up and given piecemeal de-radicalization programs and let out to roam the streets. I mean, this is the danger of not actually knowing what to do with prisoners that have this kind of radical ideology. And it accounts for one of the reasons why most European states, including the United Kingdom, is refusing to bring back terror-related individuals who went to join the Islamic State, because they really do not have any answers as to how to deal with this ideology.
And it's interesting that you should mention that, because at the time that he was sentenced in 2012, he was given an indeterminate sentence, which means that he could have been held for much longer than 8 years. But I suppose the difficulty here, David, is that, I mean, it could have hardened him even more if he had been held for a longer period of time.
The thing is, it's not how long you lock up somebody, whether you give them indeterminate or determinate sentences. That's not really the crux. The most important thing is what kind of programs, are staff in prison, are they qualified enough to, to provide programs that can assist individuals change their mindset or change their behaviors. And, the United Kingdom doesn't actually, practice death sentences. So the only option they have is to lock up somebody for life. But, judges make decisions as to, whether to give people indeterminate or determinate sentences based on the facts that they have in front of them. When they then, are given these sentences, there are a number of measures, a number of assessments that are made when these individuals are in prison, which will then, either make a decision whether to continue an indeterminate sentence or to reduce those sentences. Mind you, it's very expensive, to keep people in prison. I think what the government needs to really do is to look at what kind of programs they have in these prisons that can really turn these individuals, from, a position of risk to that of a promise. And that is the key here, where people are asking questions as to what kind of assessments were done that allowed, this individual to be released at this early stage, but then, for him to have committed an offense while he was being rehabilitated. I mean, it's the first of its kind. And that is why the government is really shocked. And something really needs to be done, Charles, in order to turn this around.
Well, you're absolutely right about that part, David. And I hope the authorities in the UK are consulting security analysts like yourself and the others who have quite a lot to say and to offer in terms of potential solutions. And the three who we know were injured in that attack, over and above the two who were stabbed to death. Those three victims taken to hospital, with one said to be critical, another is stable, and a third suffering less serious injuries. Their identities yet to be released?
Yes, as you know, when these kind of attacks happen, the government is very careful as to, what kind of identities it does release. I mean, of course, they have released the identities of the two Cambridge graduates, because unfortunately, they are now known to have, passed away. I think, what we've said to the government all the time, and we continue to say to the government, is that you need to bring into place, experts who understand the process of radicalization, and in order for them to design and draft, exit strategies, and that has to happen not just within prisons, but it has to happen out of prisons as well. I mean, the biggest problem is the politicization of these, these various programs, whether it is brought in by a leftist government or a rightist government, and I think, that needs to really change. Because at the end of the day, it is the citizens, as you have seen, that really take the brunt of it. They are the ones who are killed, they are the ones who suffer. So I think what we have always said, and what we continue to say after this incident, is that programs need to really take place in these prisons. I mean, all the issues of austerity have been raised, where cuts have been made. But again, that is not really the matter. The key thing is bring these programs, get experts, to assist the government to design these programs. And look into the inroads and the exit strategies that citizens require in order for them to be de-radicalized. I hope that the new government that would be in place in a couple of weeks would be able to look into this critically.
Okay, David, please stay with us. Would like to keep talking with you. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the security questions that have been raised by that deadly terror incident in London on Friday. Vigils being held across London and Cambridge today in remembrance of that event and the victims who died. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, 3 days after a man was shot dead by police on London Bridge after stabbing two people to death, more details have emerged about the attacks and the bravery of the members of the public who subdued him. A vigil has been taking place in London and Cambridge in remembrance. The attacker is the convicted terrorist Usman Khan, who was freed last year, less than halfway through his 16-year prison sentence for his part in a plot to bomb the London Stock Exchange. He'd been attending a conference on prisoner rehabilitation when he started lashing out at guests with two large kitchen knives and threatening to blow up the building. He was pursued out onto the street by a group of three men carrying a fire extinguisher and a large whale's tusk, who wrestled the attacker to the ground despite him wearing what they thought was a suicide vest. The police arrived shortly afterwards and shot Khan multiple times, and later revealed that the suicide vest was in fact a dummy. Speaking on London Bridge on Saturday, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said perpetrators of violent attacks should serve their full sentence.
Been down again to talk to the emergency services, to thank the police for what they're doing, and I pay tribute to their incredible response. They were on the scene in 4 minutes. The terrorist, the assailant was tackled within 5 minutes. Quite incredible response by the police. Also, I want to pay tribute again, as I think the whole country is, to the sheer bravery of those members of the public who went to deal with him spontaneously, putting their own lives at risk. It's obviously it's early days, and there's a lot of an investigation that needs to be done. But it's clear to me that this guy was out. He'd served half of his sentence. He was out on automatic early release, And I have long said that this system simply isn't working. It does not make sense for us as a society to be putting people convicted of terrorist offences, of serious violent offences, out on early release. And we argue that people should serve the term of which they're sentenced. That's my immediate takeaway from this. That's why we're committed to increasing the sentences for serious and violent offenders, and why I've argued that when people are sentenced to a certain number of years in prison, they should serve every year of that sentence. I really hope that it can be business as usual, as fast as possible, and obviously all the forensics have to be done, and I thank the police for what they're doing, and they're doing a fantastic job. But I think businesses around here want to get on with their lives. It's the run up to Christmas, and you can see people out on the streets shopping already, and that's a great thing. So we had a long discussion already today about all those cases, and a great deal of work is being done right now to make sure that the public is protected and everyone. I want to thank the security services as well for the outstanding job that they do. And don't forget, just a crucial point, for every incident like this, terrible as it is, there are many, many that are thwarted. There are many prospective terrorists who are intercepted and prevented by our fantastic police and fantastic security services.
And that's the British Prime Minister there, Boris Johnson. Well, let's continue our chat about the security questions that have been raised by that terror incident in London. With me from our studios in West London, the international security analyst, David Otto. Thank you for staying with us, David. And of course, policing has become a big political issue during this current general election campaign. The opposition Labour Party saying that the streets would be safer if there were more police. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Of course, as I said, there is an ongoing political ping-pong about the terrorist attack, with Labour proposing that the austerity plan, which led to cuts in policing and some of the members of the criminal justice system, including prisons, has been responsible for these kind of events happening. And the Conservative on the other side, have said that long prison sentences, should be the way to go about it, and that, this was done under Labour's administration. I mean, there are key questions as to why the Conservatives haven't changed that since they've been in power for 10 years. But I think, the critical point here is not about, locking people for life. I mean, if you do that, then you're accepting some kind of a defeatist policy, because it says that you have no policies in place, to change the behavioral and the mindset of individuals who have been radicalized. I mean, if you lock them in jail forever, then, it means you have no way of de-radicalizing them. But I don't think that is the response that the government really requires. But there is a point here which has been made that more policing would mean less attacks. I mean, I don't think that is really the case, because you cannot have your strategy based simply on reaction. When you have more police, it means you're looking to react much more quicker. I mean, yes, the police in this incident, were there in a couple of minutes, and we thank God. And a lot of individuals would be quite happy that, they responded very well on time. But this is not going to be the same story with the two people that have been killed so far. I mean, they will have a different tale to tell. So I think the main thing is to understand that any successful terrorist attack is an indicator of a failure in the system that the government has put in place. It could either be a failure of the prevent strategy, which the government has, which actually prevents individuals from becoming radicalized. It could either be the failure of the de-radicalization programs that these convicted criminals and terrorists have to go through in prisons. Or it could be that there's a failure in the reintegration programs or the rehabilitation programs, because people like this need a various stages of engagement, and this has to be coordinated with all the agencies that are responsible for getting these programs in place. So there is a lot going on which has not been done, but all this political ping-pong is just a way of attracting votes and tarnishing each other's reputation. It's not going to help the situation.
And of course, whilst that political ping pong, as you put it, is taking place, people are walking around the streets perhaps feeling a bit nervous. I'm just wondering how alarmed people are in London, what the mood is on the streets, given that a convicted terrorist was at liberty and allowed to move around in this way.
I think, Chris, the situation is much more worse. I mean, this incident is just one of them. The Prime Minister himself acknowledged that about 74 convicted criminals or terrorists are roaming the streets, unlicensed. The question is, where are they? How are they being monitored? I mean, the security services had just arrested one of them, I think, yesterday, and recalled him back to prison. But there's still about 73, if we go by the numbers that the Prime Minister has given. So what programs have been given to these individuals, and how dangerous are they, and what is the risk, and the whole level of terror and uncertainty is what these kind of attacks create. I mean, they are very cheap attacks, as you could actually see. This individual had to formulate a fake IED, to portray himself as if he had a real one. He may have just picked up those knives from the kitchen. So it tells you that terrorist attacks have now gone very, very cheap. They're very easy to carry out. And that is the danger that people in the public now face. Because they don't really have to have a lot of sophisticated planning. Low-tech attacks are now much more rampant. And that is the danger that people face in London. I mean, if it was an African country, I think we would actually be warning citizens not to travel to London. But I hope that, this is not going to come to that level, and the security services would do something much more reactive, I say, because, they haven't been proactive, much more reactive and effective to make sure that these kind of attacks don't take place anymore.
And briefly, David, because we're almost out of time, the police advice when an attack like this is happening is to run, hide and tell. But in this case, members of the public got involved and stopped the attack in the first instance. What's your reaction to that, given that they did the wrong thing in terms of the police advice? And we've got literally 20 seconds.
There's the general advice that, when there is a terrorist attack, you can run, hide, or, fight, but, these things happen in the split of a second, and decisions are made with a lot of adrenaline. But, the general advice is that, you make a decision that would make sure that you get out of that area much more safer. I think right now people have to understand that the threat is real, and they have to be vigilant. People have to be prepared and plan ahead. Make sure that, wherever they go, they know where they are going and they know how to escape. I think this is the general advice, Charles, and people need to be much more vigilant because, terrorists can
David, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but we literally have to go. David Otto, the international security analyst, talking to me there from our studios in London. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Do join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.